I never thought my wife of 5 years would conspire with my childhood tormentor to fix me. Jessica always seemed to understand the complicated history with my sister Megan, who bullied me relentlessly growing up. When I discovered their secret alliance, my entire world shattered. Jessica insisted they were helping me become better, but I recognized the same manipulation tactics Megan used throughout my childhood. What started as an attempt to improve our marriage spiraled into psychological warfare that forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to follow my journey from betrayal to reclaiming my self-worth. Growing up in suburban Boston, my relationship with my sister Megan was anything but normal. 3 years my senior, she seemed to derive genuine pleasure from making my life miserable. This went far beyond typical sibling rivalry. While many brothers and sisters bicker or compete, Megan systematically undermined my confidence and happiness at every opportunity. The night before my 8th grade science fair, I had spent weeks perfecting my project on renewable energy. I had built a working model of a wind turbine that could power a small light bulb. I was so proud of it and genuinely excited to show the judges. That morning I woke up to find my project completely sabotaged. The carefully balanced blades were snapped, the wiring cut, and water had been poured over my display board, ruining weeks of work. When I confronted Megan with tears in my eyes, she simply smirked and said, "Now maybe you will learn to make something that actually works." My parents, rushing to get ready for work, dismissed it as an accident and told me to figure something out. Then there was the humiliating incident with my first crush, Amanda, when I was 13. I had finally worked up the courage to talk to her after months of rehearsing what I might say. The very next day, Amanda and her friends were giving me strange looks and giggling behind their hands. I later discovered that Megan had approached Amanda and told her I still wet my bed, kept a diary where I wrote creepy things about girls, and had been in therapy for behavioral problems. None of it was true, but the damage was done. Amanda avoided me for the rest of middle school. Megan also excelled at turning my peers against me. She would invite neighborhood kids over only to exclude me, or worse, include me solely to mock me in front of everyone. She would organize games where I was always it or the target. If I complained, she would tell everyone I was a sore loser who could not take a joke. By high school, I had developed such social anxiety that making friends became nearly impossible. Perhaps most painful was how she manipulated our parents. Whenever I achieved something noteworthy, Megan found ways to either diminish it or claim partial credit. When I won a state writing competition, she told our parents she had edited my essay and practically rewrote the whole thing. When I was accepted to a good college, she mentioned how she had helped me with application strategies. My parents, perhaps seeking family harmony, often praised her for being such a supportive sister. The most insidious aspect of Megan's behavior was how she framed her cruelty as help. "I am just toughening him up," she would say. Or, "Someone needs to prepare him for the real world." This pattern of presenting her bullying as assistance for my own good became her signature manipulation tactic, one that would haunt me years later. As adults, we maintained a strained relationship characterized by minimal contact. We would see each other at family gatherings, exchange perfunctory birthday texts, and maintain a facade of normalcy for our parents' sake. I worked hard to be civil, to move past the trauma, but kept a safe emotional distance. I had accepted that we would never be close, and that was okay. I just wanted peace. The day I met Jessica felt like the universe finally balancing the scales in my favor. It was at my college friend's housewarming party 4 years after graduation. I had almost skipped the event, exhausted from a long work week, but decided to make an appearance out of loyalty. Jessica was the new neighbor my friend had invited. She stood by the window looking slightly out of place, and something compelled me to introduce myself. Our connection was instant and powerful. We discovered shared passions for hiking the New England trails, watching obscure vintage films, and a similar outlook on life. But beyond our common interests, Jessica possessed a warmth and supportiveness I had rarely experienced. She listened intently when I spoke, remembered small details, and made me feel valued in a way that was completely foreign to me. After exchanging numbers, we began dating and quickly became inseparable. Every moment with her felt rejuvenating, like finally breathing clean air after years in a smoky room. 8 months later, we moved in together, and within a year and a half, I proposed during a sunrise hike to our favorite mountain vista. We had an intimate beach wedding with just our closest friends and immediate family. Megan attended but was mercifully uninvolved in the planning. During the early days of our relationship, I had cautiously shared some of my childhood experiences with Jessica. She seemed genuinely horrified by Megan's behavior and completely understood my desire to keep a healthy distance from my sister. This understanding was one of the countless reasons I fell deeply in love with Jessica. I finally had someone in my corner, someone who saw me clearly and loved me without an agenda to change or fix me. Together we dreamed about our future, traveling to national parks across the country, eventually starting a family, and growing old, surrounded by books and vinyl records in a home filled with laughter. For the first time, I believed such happiness was possible for me. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I had hoped for and more. We purchased a modest craftsman house and spent weekends restoring its original features, learning about home improvement together through countless YouTube tutorials and some humorous mishaps. Our shared sense of humor got us through the frustrations of renovations, like when I accidentally painted us both into a corner of the kitchen, or when Jessica installed a ceiling fan that spun so violently we feared it might detach. On weekends, when we weren't working on the house, we explored hiking trails and local vineyards, compiling a scrapbook of our adventures. We supported each other through career challenges, Jessica dealing with difficult colleagues at her graphic design firm and me navigating the stressful deadline cycles at my software engineering job. She helped me become more confident in professional settings, encouraging me to speak up in meetings and pursue projects that interested me rather than just those I felt comfortable with. We established special traditions that became the fabric of our shared life: Sunday morning breakfasts with homemade waffles, anniversary trips to new destinations, and holiday rituals that were uniquely ours. We talked tentatively about starting a family someday, both agreeing we wanted to enjoy our time as a couple before taking that step. For the first time in my life, I felt truly secure. The hypervigilance I had developed growing up with Megan gradually melted away in the warmth of Jessica's consistent love and respect. I stopped expecting criticism or mockery around every corner. I began to trust that good things could last. The shift in our marriage happened so gradually that I struggled to pinpoint when things began to change. In retrospect, it seemed to coincide with my promotion at work. After 3 years of dedicated effort, I was elevated to senior software engineer with considerably more responsibility. I was thrilled but underestimated how the increased workload would affect our home life. My hours grew longer as I adapted to new responsibilities. Projects that had previously been someone else's problem were now mine to solve. I found myself bringing work home sometimes, coding into the late evening hours. While Jessica initially expressed pride in my advancement, her support began to waver as weeks of my reduced presence turned into months. "We never go out anymore," became a common complaint. Though I tried to explain the temporary nature of the situation, Jessica grew increasingly frustrated with our diminished social life. Where she once understood my introversion, she now seemed to view it as a character flaw that needed correction. Our disagreements about starting a family also intensified. Jessica, now 32, began to express urgency about having children. While I wanted kids too, I felt overwhelmed by the prospect of adding parenthood to our already strained schedule. Each time I suggested waiting until my work situation stabilized, I could see disappointment cloud her eyes. What had once been minor differences became frequent arguments. Communication that had flowed easily now faltered, with both of us retreating to defensive positions. I made earnest attempts to reconnect, planning surprise date nights, suggesting weekend getaways to our favorite spots, even taking a rare week off work for a cabin retreat. These efforts would create brief periods of harmony before tensions resurfaced. Jessica became increasingly critical of habits she had previously accepted, or even found endearing my methodical approach to household tasks, my occasional need for solitude, my preference for planning rather than spontaneity. I found myself constantly apologizing for being exactly the person she had married. The warm, safe home we had created together became an emotional minefield. I began to feel a familiar anxiety creeping back into my daily life, the same walking on eggshells sensation I had experienced growing up with Megan. I would analyze conversations before having them rehearsing my words to minimize potential criticism. Despite this growing distance, I remained committed to our marriage. I believed we were simply going through a rough patch that all couples eventually face. I was determined to find our way back to each other, though I was increasingly uncertain how to bridge the widening gap between us. The discovery happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Jessica was showering, and her phone left on the coffee table lit up with a message notification. I had never been the type to snoop, but the name that flashed on the screen stopped me cold. Megan. Why would my sister be texting my wife? They had always been cordial but distant, respectful of the boundaries I had established. Before I could process my thoughts, the phone lit up again with another message. Without touching the device, I could see part of the preview. He always gets defensive when. The rest was cut off. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. They were talking about me. When Jessica emerged from the bathroom, I asked directly about her communication with Megan. Her expression flickered between surprise and guilt before settling into defensive irritation. "We've been talking for a few weeks," she admitted reluctantly. "I was trying to understand you better. There are things about you that Megan knows that I don't." The betrayal cut deep. "You could have asked me anything you wanted to know," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Jessica sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "It's not the same. You don't see yourself clearly." "Megan has perspective." "Perspective," I echoed incredulously. "She tormented me throughout my entire childhood. Her perspective is completely warped." "You're overreacting," Jessica said dismissively. "It was just normal sibling stuff. Everyone goes through it." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Jessica had been the one person who had validated my experiences, who had understood the impact of Megan's bullying. Now she was rewriting our shared understanding, making me question my own memories and feelings. Over the following days, I discovered the extent of their communication, dozens of text messages, phone calls, and even several lunch meetings. The sickening reality that my wife and childhood bully were discussing me behind my back left me reeling. When I expressed how deeply this violated my trust, Jessica became increasingly defensive. "Megan has valuable insights into patterns you don't recognize in yourself," she insisted. "She cares about you and wants our marriage to succeed." No matter how I tried to explain why this boundary violation felt so significant, Jessica refused to acknowledge my perspective. She treated my hurt as evidence of the very flaws she and Megan had apparently been discussing. A week later, Jessica announced that Megan had helped her identify my core issues that were supposedly damaging our marriage. They had collaborated on a list of behaviors I needed to work on to become a better husband. The list included things like excessive need for alone time, resistance to social activities, and difficulty accepting constructive criticism, all traits that Megan had mocked throughout my childhood, and that Jessica had previously accepted as part of who I am. Megan began dropping by our home unexpectedly, ostensibly to visit Jessica, but I recognized her true purpose to observe our interactions and report back on my behavior. The way Jessica's language changed alarmed me. She began using the same phrases and criticisms Megan had wielded against me as a child. "You're being too sensitive," and "this is why people find you difficult" became common refrains. Their most intrusive suggestion was implementing mandatory weekly family dinners with Megan. "Family connection is important," Jessica argued, completely disregarding the history that made such forced interactions painful for me. "Megan thinks regular exposure will help you overcome your antisocial tendencies." My anxiety skyrocketed. Childhood insecurities I had worked years to overcome came flooding back. I found myself second-guessing my every word and action, constantly anticipating criticism. The woman who had once been my safe harbor now viewed me through my sister's distorted lens, seeing flaws and deficiencies where she had once seen qualities she loved. As Jessica grew increasingly impatient with my reluctance to embrace their help, I felt trapped between standing up for myself and trying to save my marriage. I began to wonder if perhaps they were right, if I was indeed fundamentally flawed in ways I couldn't perceive. The coordinated pressure made me doubt my own reality. The gaslighting escalated as Jessica and Megan began actively rewriting my childhood memories. When I mentioned specific incidents of Megan's cruelty, They would exchange knowing looks before one of them would correct my recollection. "That's not how it happened," Megan would say confidently. "You always exaggerate things. Remember how Mom and Dad never believed you because you made everything so dramatic?" Jessica would nod in agreement despite not having been present for any of these events. "I think you've built these incidents up in your mind over time," she would add gently as if her tone could soften the invalidation. If I expressed hurt at their dismissal, the immediate response was predictable. "You're being too sensitive again. This is exactly what we're trying to help you with." The familiar accusation transported me straight back to my childhood when any emotional response was used as evidence of my supposed weakness. What disturbed me most was discovering that Jessica had been sharing deeply private details of our marriage with Megan, intimate conversations, personal struggles, even aspects of our physical relationship. The violation of privacy was staggering. These women had essentially formed a committee to analyze and fix me without my consent or input. As this alliance solidified, I found myself increasingly isolated. Jessica had begun framing our marital issues to friends in a way that positioned me as the sole problem. By the time I realized what was happening, several mutual friends had already formed opinions based on a one-sided narrative. Invitations decreased, and I noticed sympathetic glances directed at Jessica when we did socialize. My body began manifesting the stress physically. Insomnia kept me staring at the ceiling most nights. My appetite diminished noticeably, and I lived with constant muscle tension that triggered frequent headaches. The weight loss prompted more criticism. "Now you're not eating properly just to make me feel bad," Jessica accused one evening. When both women confronted me together, I found myself unable to articulate my thoughts clearly. Words that formed coherently in my mind emerged jumbled and defensive when spoken aloud. This struggle to express myself was then cited as further evidence of my communication problems. It was a vicious cycle with no escape. The situation felt eerily familiar. It was the same feeling of being cornered and misunderstood that had characterized my childhood. Only now the person who had promised to always be in my corner was holding the door shut. In a last-ditch effort to save our marriage, I suggested couples therapy. Jessica initially agreed, but my hope quickly evaporated when I arrived at our first session to find Megan already seated in the waiting room. "What is she doing here?" I asked Jessica quietly. "She knows both of us and can provide context." Jessica replied as if this were perfectly reasonable. "Plus, she's already heard everything about our issues." The therapist, Dr. Marshall, appeared visibly confused when we explained the three-person arrangement. Nevertheless, she professionally attempted to navigate the unusual dynamic, asking each of us to describe our understanding of the situation. Before I could speak, Megan launched into a comprehensive analysis of my supposed issues, describing patterns from childhood and connecting them to current marital problems with stunning confidence. Jessica nodded along occasionally, adding supporting examples. When Dr. Marshall gently redirected, asking Jessica to express her feelings in her own words. Jessica hesitated before deferring back to Megan. "She explains it better than I can," Jessica admitted. After nearly 40 minutes of this, Dr. Marshall carefully suggested that future sessions should include only the married couple. While family perspectives can be valuable, she explained diplomatically, the therapeutic space for couples typically works best with just the two partners present. Megan's reaction was immediate and hostile. "You clearly don't understand the situation," she snapped. "Standard approaches won't work with my brother. I've known him his entire life." Jessica immediately sided with Megan, gathering her things and standing up. "If you can't be flexible in your approach, this isn't going to work," she told the therapist. As we left, Dr. Marshall handed me her card with a second number written on the back. Later, when I called this number, I discovered it was for an individual therapist who specialized in family trauma. "I think you might benefit from some one-on-one support, Doctor," Marshall had said carefully when Jessica was out of earshot. That small act of professional recognition was the first indication that perhaps I wasn't crazy for feeling something was deeply wrong with the dynamic that had developed. The breaking point came during what Megan called a family healing retreat at a lakeside cabin 3 hours from our home. She had organized the entire weekend, without consulting me, inviting our parents and Jessica's sister Laura, along with the stated purpose of strengthening family bonds and working through long-standing issues. From the moment we arrived on Friday evening, Megan positioned herself as the facilitator and authority on everyone's psychological needs. She had created a detailed schedule of activities including structured sharing sessions, relationship rebuilding exercises, and guided conflict resolution. The focus, though never explicitly stated, was clearly on addressing my supposed deficiencies. The first dinner was excruciatingly awkward. My father, a generally taciturn man who avoided emotional discussions, looked deeply uncomfortable with Megan's therapist-like introduction to the weekend. My mother, always eager for family harmony, tried to maintain enthusiasm but kept glancing at me with worried eyes. Laura, who had always been friendly but not particularly close to me, seemed confused by the strange dynamic. This weekend, Megan announced over dessert, we're going to help Andrew recognize some patterns that are affecting all his relationships. We need everyone's honest input. I felt ambushed but tried to maintain my composure. Looking around the table, I could see that family members were as bewildered as I was by this approach. Only Jessica seemed comfortable with the situation, sitting close to Megan and nodding supportively at her pronouncements. As the weekend progressed, I became increasingly withdrawn. Activities designed to expose my flaws left me feeling vulnerable and attacked. During a communication exercise, Megan interrupted me repeatedly to point out my defensive body language and problematic word choices. Jessica watched passively occasionally, adding her observations about my resistance to feedback. The tension built steadily as I struggled to maintain my dignity in what felt like a coordinated assault on my character. My parents exchanged concerned glances but seemed hesitant to intervene in what had been framed as a therapeutic process. It was Laura who first pulled me aside, catching me alone on the dock Saturday afternoon. "What's really going on here?" she asked directly. "This feels really off, and I've never seen Jessica act this way." Her genuine concern nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. I briefly explained the alliance that had formed between my wife and sister, and Laura's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "That's not normal," she said firmly, "and it's not okay." The validation from an unexpected source strengthened me for what came next, the infamous sharing circle that would become the weekend's breaking point. Saturday evening after dinner, Megan gathered everyone in the cabin's living room. Sitting in a circle, she explained that each person would share constructive observations about me, observations that would help me grow as a person. "Remember," she instructed, "this is coming from a place of love. Andrew needs to hear these things." She began by listing my supposed lifelong patterns of avoidance and passivity. Jessica followed with examples of how these traits manifested in our marriage. Then Megan turned to my parents, encouraging them to share instances of my difficult behavior from childhood. My father, who had remained largely silent throughout the weekend, finally spoke up. "I'm not sure I understand the purpose of this," he said carefully. "This doesn't feel constructive to me." Megan began to explain the therapeutic value of the exercise, but my father shook his head. "I think we need to take a break from this approach," he said with uncharacteristic firmness. The circle disbanded awkwardly. I excused myself and retreated to the bedroom. Jessica and I were sharing, needing space to process the humiliation and gather my thoughts. While searching for my phone charger in Jessica's overnight bag, my hand brushed against something solid, a leather-bound journal I didn't recognize. I hesitated, aware of the privacy boundaries I normally respected. But given the extensive violation of my own privacy over the past months, I made a decision I would later recognize as the turning point. I opened the journal. The title page read, "Andrew Improvement Project," in my wife's handwriting with additions in Megan's distinctive script. What followed was page after page of detailed observations about me, daily failures annotated with intervention strategies and progress notes. March 15th. Andrew spent 2 hours reading instead of socializing when my friends visited. Intervention attempted interrupting every 20 minutes to involve him. Result: increasing irritation. Eventual participation but with poor attitude. Note: possible restriction of solo activities needed. April 2nd. Declined family dinner invitation using work as excuse. Called his manager pretending to be potential client to verify he wasn't actually working late. Confirmed our suspicion he was avoiding social engagement. May 10th suggested couples dance lessons. Predictable resistance encountered. Implemented shame technique by comparing to Jessica's more social ex-boyfriend. Partial success, he agreed to attend one class but showed minimal effort. The entries continued documenting not just my behavior but their manipulative interventions and my reactions. Most disturbing was a detailed 12-month plan outlined in the final pages, describing how they would systematically correct various aspects of my personality, social behaviors, and even my career trajectory. The journal revealed the full extent of their conspiracy, the coordinated manipulation, the boundary violations, the fundamental disrespect for my autonomy and identity. Jessica and Megan didn't see me as a person. They saw a project, a problem to be fixed according to their specifications. With the journal clutched in my hand, I returned to the main room where the others had gathered for a board game attempting to salvage the evening. The conversation halted as I entered. Looking directly at Megan and Jessica, I held up the journal. "I think everyone should hear what's really been happening," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I read selected entries aloud, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. The room fell completely silent except for my words. My mother's hand covered her mouth in shock. Laura stared at Jessica with undisguised disbelief. My father's expression hardened with each passage I shared. When I finished, Megan immediately went on the defensive. "This was all for your own good," she insisted. "You've always needed extra guidance to function normally in society." Jessica finally recognized what I've known all along. Jessica, tears streaming down her face, reached for my arm. "I just wanted our marriage to be better," she pleaded. "I thought if you could change these things, we'd be happier." "These things," I repeated quietly. "You mean my fundamental personality, the core of who I am." My father stood up abruptly. "We're leaving," he announced to my mother. "This is not what we agreed to participate in." Looking at me with sad eyes, he added, "Son, I think you have some important decisions to make." Laura also stood, addressing Jessica directly. "I don't even recognize who you've become in this situation. This is cruel and manipulative. I'm really disappointed." The retreat ended that night with family members departing, despite the late hour, unwilling to remain in the toxic atmosphere. Jessica and I drove home in silence, the journal sitting between us like a physical manifestation of our broken trust. As we approached our house, Jessica finally spoke. "We can work through this," she said tentatively. "But you need to understand that Megan and I really do know what's best for you. If you want our marriage to continue, you need to commit to the improvement plan." In that moment, I realized with painful clarity that my marriage might truly be over. The woman I had loved so deeply no longer existed, or perhaps had never truly existed at all. That night alone in our guest room, I reflected on the patterns that had defined my life. From childhood with Megan to my marriage with Jessica, I had gradually accepted the narrative that I was fundamentally flawed, that I needed to be fixed to be worthy of love. I had allowed others to define my value and dictate the terms of my acceptance. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with the therapist Dr. Marshall had recommended. Dr. Chen listened intently as I shared the details of my situation, occasionally taking notes but mostly maintaining supportive eye contact. "What you're describing," she said carefully, when I had finished, "contains elements of emotional abuse and coercive control. The journal in particular represents a profound violation of trust and basic respect." Her professional validation helped solidify what I had begun to recognize: the dynamic with Jessica and Megan wasn't just unhealthy, it was actively harmful. "Your sister has a long-standing pattern of controlling and undermining behavior," Dr. Chen continued. "And unfortunately, your wife has become enmeshed in that dynamic. The question now is what boundaries you need to establish for your own well-being." Over the next few sessions, we worked on identifying my core values and needs in relationships. I recognized that I deserved respect, autonomy, and genuine acceptance, not conditional love predicated on becoming someone else's version of me. The decision to prioritize my mental health over saving my marriage at any cost was agonizing but necessary. I arranged to stay temporarily in my friend Mark's guest house, packing essential items while Jessica was at work to avoid a confrontation I wasn't yet prepared to handle. I left a letter explaining my need for space and my intention to communicate only through written means for the immediate future. I established clear boundaries in writing to both Jessica and Megan. No unannounced visits, no communication, except by text or email, and absolutely no contact between them regarding me. The first weeks of separation were a turbulent mix of liberation and fear. Away from the constant criticism and manipulation, I began to breathe more easily. Yet years of conditioning had left me with significant anxiety about asserting boundaries. The first time I declined a meeting Jessica proposed, I experienced a full-blown panic attack, certain I was somehow being bad or difficult by prioritizing my needs. Dr. Chen helped me recognize these responses as normal reactions to emerging from a controlling relationship. "You're learning to trust your own judgment again," she explained. "That takes time." Gradually, I rediscovered aspects of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage: my genuine enjoyment of solitude, my passion for landscape photography, my preference for deep conversations over large social gatherings. I began to recognize my own worth, independent of others' approval. After 3 weeks of limited communication, I agreed to meet Jessica at a neutral coffee shop to discuss our future. She arrived looking tired but composed, a stark contrast to my growing sense of clarity and purpose. "I miss you," she said immediately. "Please come home so we can work this out." Calmly, I explained how the alliance with Megan had damaged not just our marriage but my sense of self. I described the emotional impact of discovering their coordinated efforts to fix me and how fundamentally disrespectful it was to view a partner as a renovation project rather than a whole person. Jessica's reaction was mixed. At moments, she seemed to genuinely grasp the harm that had been done, her eyes filling with tears of apparent remorse. But these glimpses of understanding would quickly give way to justifications. "I just wanted you to be happier," she insisted. "More social, more confident." "But I was happy," I replied, "until I was made to feel inadequate for being exactly who I've always been." By the end of our conversation, I recognized a painful truth: Jessica might never fully comprehend how profoundly her actions had betrayed our marriage. Her perception had been so thoroughly influenced by Megan that she couldn't see the manipulation for what it was. The following week, I filed for separation, establishing a formal boundary that gave me space to continue healing. Megan's reaction was predictably aggressive. She sent multiple lengthy emails explaining her good intentions and dismissing my overreaction. My response was brief but firm: "Please respect my explicit request for no contact." As news of our separation spread through our social circle, reactions varied widely. Some mutual friends immediately took Jessica's side, accepting her narrative of me being resistant to growth. Others reached out privately to offer support, having witnessed the troubling dynamic that had developed. My parents, to my surprise, scheduled their own appointment with Dr. Chen to understand how they might have enabled Megan's behavior throughout our childhood. This acknowledgement of their role was the beginning of a healing process I hadn't dared to hope for. As weeks turned to months, I continued rebuilding my life with intentionality and self-compassion. Therapy provided essential tools for recognizing and avoiding unhealthy relationship patterns. I reconnected with old friends who knew the authentic me and joined a local hiking group where I formed new, genuine connections. Photography, a passion I had neglected during my marriage, became both creative outlet and healing practice. I spent weekends exploring state parks, capturing landscapes that reflected my emotional journey, vast, sometimes difficult terrain that nevertheless contained unexpected beauty. My relationship with my parents evolved as they made efforts to understand the impact of their parenting choices. While we couldn't rewrite the past, their willingness to acknowledge mistakes created space for a more authentic connection moving forward. The most significant transformation wasn't external but internal. I developed confidence in setting and maintaining boundaries, not just with Megan and Jessica, but in all relationships. I learned to recognize red flags earlier and to trust my perceptions rather than allowing others to define my reality. The peace that came from living authentically surpassed any approval I had ever sought from others. Small victories accumulated, standing up for myself in work meetings, expressing preferences without apology, allowing myself solitude without guilt. Each reinforced my growing self-trust. 6 months after our separation, Jessica and I finalized our divorce. While the end of our marriage brought sadness, it also brought resolution and the freedom to create a life aligned with my true self. We sold our house, divided our possessions, and formally ended the chapter we had written together. Today I live in a small but comfortable apartment overlooking a nature preserve. My walls display my own photography rather than the generic art Jessica preferred. My bookshelves hold volumes I genuinely want to read, not those chosen to impress visitors. My time is my own, spent in pursuits that bring genuine fulfillment. The most valuable lesson from this painful experience was learning that true love never seeks to fundamentally change its recipient. Support and growth within relationships are natural and positive, but they must be built on a foundation of acceptance and respect for each person's core identity. I've discovered that refusing to be someone's improvement project isn't selfish, it's essential for authentic connection. The freedom found in being genuinely yourself and being valued for exactly that is the foundation of all meaningful relationships. My relationship with Megan remains distant but is no longer defined by her power over me. I've released the hope for the sibling relationship I never had and accepted the reality of who she is while protecting myself through firm boundaries. While I don't know what the future holds romantically, I approach new relationships with both openness and discernment, confident in my ability to recognize manipulation and value authentic connection. Have you ever found yourself being improved by someone who claimed to know better than you what you needed? Have you experienced that moment of clarity when you realized you had to choose yourself even at great cost? If my story resonated with you, please share your experience in the comments. Your journey might help someone else recognize unhealthy patterns in their own life. Please like this video if it provided insight, subscribe for more authentic life stories, and share with anyone who might need this message of self-worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your authentic self is never something that needs fixing.